More and more schools today are getting rid of cursive. But what if cursive is still important? What if cursive affects our brains in a very, very positive way, as well as our reading skills? Well, today, y'all, I am making a case for cursive. But before we get into today's episode, if you haven't signed up for the newsletter and you'd like more tips and tricks, you can sign up for the newsletter at schooltohomeschool.com, where I like to send encouragement, tips, and tricks to help you in your educational journey of your kids. My name is Janae Daniels. I'm a wife, a mother of 6, and a former middle school teacher turned homeschool mom. Have you thought about pulling your kids from the public school system like I did, but you are scared to death and don't know what to do next? Well, my friends, I felt the exact same way, and you have come to the right place. I am here to help you leave the system so that you can take the hearts and minds of your children back. Welcome to the School to Homeschool podcast. Okay, y'all. A few weeks ago, I did a social media reel on cursive. I just recently picked up the Spencerian cursive workbook for my kids, which is a little bit different than some of the contemporary homeschooling sources that we use and different curriculums that people use. And I was surprised at some of the backlash I got for teaching cursive, people saying that it was outdated. And yet when I started doing research, and I even cited some research on cursive, and yet I still got backlash. But the interesting thing is, I don't think that we should throw cursive out yet. I think that would be a really, really bad idea. And so as I started digging into the research of how cursive affects the brain, because there is research on how cursive affects the brain, I was really pleasantly surprised at what effects that it has, not only on cognitive ability, but also on reading ability. So today, I'm going to make a little case for cursive. So many schools are getting rid of it. And I even heard a homeschooling influencer say it's not necessary, it's outdated, but it's not yet, y'all. Okay, so I'm going to put in the show notes some of the research that you can look up yourselves. You can read it yourselves. But cursive affects the brain. It creates a neurological engagement. And one of the arguments, someone said, well, you said handwriting and that could be print. But in the studies that I read, they said, yes, handwriting affects the brain in a positive way, but they were speaking more specifically of cursive because of the connection that cursive has, because you don't lift your pen off the paper. So handwriting, and cursive specifically, activates broader brain networks than typing. High-density EEG research shows handwriting engages sensory, motor, and memory areas of the brain. The neuroscience suggests that cursive leads to stronger brain connectivity, which supports learning and memory formation. So when children are writing cursive, they aren't just moving a pen, they're physically rewiring their brains for learning. Okay, and this is from, I believe this is Psychology Today. Again, I'm going to include in the show notes all the research so you can look up the studies yourself and read them yourself. This is what is said. Meta-analysis showed that cursive handwriting primed the brain for learning by synchronizing brain waves in the theta rhythm range, 4 to 7 hertz, and stimulating more electrical activity in the brain's parietal lobe and central regions. Existing literature suggests that such oscillatory neuronal activity in these particular brain areas is important for memory and for the encoding of new information, and therefore provides the brain with optimal conditions for learning. As kids learn cursive, it connects the brain. And it's interesting because I still believe kids need to learn to type, right? I'm starting my 13-year-old on typing. I probably should have started him sooner. But yet I recently, after doing these studies, started making him do all of his copy work in cursive, like all of his homework I'm making him do in cursive, because he's not great at it. Like, he knows how to write cursive, but practicing it, I have to reinforce the practicing of it so that it becomes more fluid for him. And now with my daughter, who's 17, always writes in cursive. She loves cursive. She thinks it's as a girl, she's like, I think it's prettier, and then my youngest is learning cursive right now, and she's 9. So what one of the studies found is that when they compared handwriting to non-motor practices, It showed that the cursive leads to faster learning and greater generalization to reading tasks, which I thought was interesting. Studies including Wiley and Rapp indicate that handwriting, cursive more specifically, builds richer mental representations of letters than typing or visual recognition alone. One study found that like people who write as opposed to type notes remember better the information by physically writing. And I had learned that several years ago. Whenever I take notes on something, I don't type it out anymore. I have to physically write it because I'm like, I have to have it go into my brain. Meta-analysis of handwriting programs found teaching handwriting significantly improved writing fluency in young students. Again, they were talking about, I keep saying they would use the term handwriting, but then several of the studies corrected and said more specifically cursive. When you type, one area of the brain lights up. When you write in print, more of the brain lights up. But when you write in cursive, the whole brain lights up. These studies show that writing by hand, especially cursive, isn't a quaint school exercise. It's literacy training supported by research. So I think it's fascinating that it helps the whole brain light up, and that when children learn cursive, it helps their ability to read. That those things are connected. To be able to read and then to write. And so I thought that was fascinating that by learning the cursive and learning those strokes and then practicing it, it helps the child's cognitive ability with literacy, which I thought was fascinating. It can enhance word patterns and reduce letter confusion, especially letter reversals. Some evidence shows that cursive learners exhibit improved reading and writing outcomes compared to peers when cursive is explicitly taught early. Because letters link together in cursive, kids often process whole words instead of isolated shapes, and that can boast a reading fluency. My kids, all of them struggled with D's and B's, and yet when they learn cursive, that helps their writing fluency, right? It makes sense because cursive is, the D's and the B's in cursive are slightly different. Now, I'm not saying don't teach print. It's still important to learn to print things, but the cursive helps with their reading fluency. It helps with that confusion with letter reversals. Cursive integrates motor planning with visual and language processes, which is unique compared to like typing. These coordinated systems deepen learning and help children develop fine motor control that supports academic skills. So cursive isn't just about pretty letters. It's about coordinating the brain and the body in ways that strengthen attention and learning loops. Then also studies of cursive instruction showed reduced confusion for learners with letter reversals, as I said before, and distinct motor patterns can help with certain writing challenges. So for some kids, it helps build confidence and clarity that they don't have when they print because they don't worry about the letter reversals. I think one of the most important things, yes, it's great for the brain for children to learn cursive. It connects things, it helps them with literacy, it lights up the whole brain. More importantly, it connects children, it connects us to the past. Can you imagine if we can't read cursive, we can't read historical documents, which are written in cursive. Even though sometimes it's tough, when I went and started reading some of the early documents from the 1600s, from the Pilgrims and the Plymouth Colony, they're in cursive, and some of the letters are different. S's look more like F's to me, but even though it's hard, I can still read those documents. Whereas for people who can't read or write cursive, it looks like a foreign language to them. And I look at even letters as late as the 1950s, as I was going through my parents' stuff after their passing with my siblings, the letters that they have to each other, letters that they got from other people. Y'all, do you want to guess how many of those were in print and how many of those were typed? Almost none. The letters were in cursive and I could read them. My siblings could read them. And my kids, even though it's a little bit harder as they're still learning cursive, my younger two, they can read those letters. Cursive connects us to our history. Can you imagine if people can't read cursive? how that would affect the Constitution. And somebody on YouTube made this comment. They said, so they can read the Constitution, really reaching hard. Most people who read cursive have never read the Constitution. I've read the Constitution. It's on my wall, and it's in cursive, and I can read it. And my kids and I have read it together. But if we can't read the Constitution, is it possible that people who can read it can misinterpret it? Is it possible? I know that it's getting a little conspiracy theorist, right? But if we can't read these historical documents, then how are we going to know what they say? We'd have to take somebody else's word for it. And I don't want my kids growing up always taking somebody else's word for stuff. I want them to be able to know themselves, to read themselves, to process themselves, to decide things for themselves, to critically think for themselves. But if they don't have that tool in their arsenal, that ability to read historical documents because of such a simple thing as cursive, that grossly limits them. That grossly limits us. And I still want them connected to the past. I still want them being able to read the beautiful letters that our ancestors and that our family members wrote to one another. The letters that my husband wrote to me as we were dating, I want my kids to be able to read those. I want them to be able to read my journals, which are in cursive. I mean, I don't want them to read them right now, but some of them I don't mind. But I want my kids and my grandkids to be able to be connected to me when I'm gone, but they won't be if they can't read cursive, because guess what? I wrote in cursive. Anyway, but if you take one thing away today, let it be this. Cursive is not a relic. It's a brain-building tool backed by research. From better memory to deeper literacy to stronger cognitive coordination, the science supports keeping it in our children's learning toolkit. But more importantly, it still connects us to the past. So if you don't teach cursive for any other reason, let it be to connect our kids to the past. Now, there's all different kinds of cursive that you can teach. There's Spencerian cursive, which is very flowy. There's actually books that you can buy, and I'll put links in the show notes for PDF downloads of Spencerian cursive, as well as if you want to purchase it on Amazon, you can buy those reproduced books. We use Teaching Cursive, The Good and the Beautiful, which is a more contemporary cursive. It's changed. Cursive has changed over the years, but most of the letters are pretty similar. It's just a matter of like which is more rounded versus which is a little bit more flowy. Those things are different as I've looked at the different styles of cursive throughout the generations. I didn't learn Spencerian cursive growing up, but I can still read it. And I'm actually practicing it because I want to write it because it's very beautiful. But we use The Good and the Beautiful handwriting books, which are great. I'm not affiliated with The Good and the Beautiful, so I don't make any money off of, advertising them. But that's what books my kids use to practice cursive. My older daughter's starting to practice Spencerian cursive just because it's beautiful. So I'll put some different links in the show notes if you're interested in some cursive options for teaching kids. I did think it was interesting that with Spencerian cursive, which they started teaching in the 19th century versus a rounded cursive, which was taught prior to that they started teaching children earlier and earlier cursive versus the rounded cursive they wouldn't start teaching until about age 9, kind of like we do today, 8, 9. The Spencerian cursive they taught much younger, like 5, 6, 7. They'd start teaching that. So however you want to teach it, it's good. It's good to learn cursive at any age. And if you don't know cursive yourself, maybe, just maybe, it's time to learn. Although if you are a Gen X or Gen Zer or even a baby boomer that's raising grandkids, here's looking at you, Kathy, we probably already know cursive because they were still teaching it to us. It's been a recent development that cursive has been taken out of schools. And it's not every school. My kids' old elementary school was still teaching cursive. So, but I've talked to people who are like, oh no, they took cursive out of our schools. So with that, teach your kids cursive. Mamas and papas, grandmas and grandpas, you are doing so much better than you think you are. We will talk next week.